Hook 'em horns, everybody. Welcome back to episode 26 of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. I am your host, high atop a morbid but still beautiful Houston, Texas, after the Astros got knocked out of the ALCS and the playoffs last night against the Texas Rangers. We have Phillies and Diamondbacks Game 7, top of the ninth inning right now. It looks like Marte or Perdomo on first.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, will do it for that inning. So we're going to the bottom of the ninth. The Diamondbacks are 3 outs away from facing those Texas Rangers in the World Series after they were down 3-2 in this series. It kind of mirrors the exact same way, both series. So we're going to have baseball to talk about later on this week as we'll preview the World Series, whichever matchup we get. But we're here to talk college football as always and a little college basketball as the season is now less than 2 weeks away from tipping off. There's a lot of Texas football discussion today. If you come here for the Texas football discussion, we've got a lot to get into from that standpoint with the quarterback injury and this backup quarterback battle, how Texas is going to proceed for the next couple of weeks with either Maalik Murphy and or Arch Manning at the helm at the quarterback position, at least for the next 2 or 3 weeks, it's looking like. What's their identity going to be offensively? How's that going to evolve? Can they continue to keep themselves alive in the Big 12 championship conversation? That's their goal right now, is get to Arlington. There are some other teams right now on that schedule that could be dangerous, including Kansas State here, not this upcoming weekend, but the weekend after. And then going to Fort Worth is never easy at TCU the weekend following, especially with a very young quarterback who is just now getting in-game experience in college football. We're also going to be ranking our best one-loss teams in the country. We know about the undefeateds. We know who's undefeated is what I'm trying to say. We know Oklahoma. We know Florida State. We know, Georgia, Michigan. We know those teams are undefeated. We're going to talk about the best one-loss teams. We're going to talk a little Heisman talk, and then we're going to get into Duke, their basketball team, at the very end. Let's start, though, where we have to start, and that's this Texas football discussion. In case you guys haven't heard, if you've been living under a rock the past 48 to 72 hours, Quinn Ewers was hurt in the game against Houston, which was a lot closer than it should have been. Given the way Texas started that football game, he was hurt in the third quarter on a sack. He hurts his right shoulder, his throwing shoulder, a similar injury to what he had last year. It's a grade 2 AC joint sprain, which is not expected to be season ending, which is good news for Texas. Oh gosh, I feel a sneeze coming on. So excuse me if I have to sneeze. But it sounds like he's going to miss multiple weeks, probably 2 to 3 at the very least. So there are a lot of angles to address here. There's the Quinn angle. There is, of course, the expected starter, Maalik Murphy, and his expectation. How will Texas center this offense around what Maalik Murphy does best? What is Texas's offensive identity going to be? Who needs to step up to help Maalik and this team win games in this time when Quinn Ewers is out with injury. What are the dangerous games on this schedule? There are how much pressure is on Sark in this situation in his third year in Austin? There's a lot to get into here. I'm not sure we'll be able to get to all of it today, but where do you want to start? What is the main thing you want to start with that comes to your mind first?
Well, the big thing about Maalik that I actually didn't know about is his lack of experience as a starter in high school. That was what I had read up on. You had sent me a link to his scouting, I guess recruiting status at the time when he was recruited, and he didn't have a lot of playing time in high school. He's a strong armed QB, but not a whole ton of game reps. So from that standpoint, it makes you, a little bit apprehensive. But if you watch the spring game, he showed a lot of good things. We know this guy hits the gym and the weight room. I mean, they've been, the UT quarterback room has been, in the gym all summer working out together, seemingly, from what I've heard. But whether it shows up on the field or not, whether, Stark has a good plan for him or not, we won't know until Saturday. That's really the bottom line. We're not there with him at practice. We don't know his strengths and weaknesses truly until we see him in a game. So the hope is that, if he struggles to read coverages, Sark can adjust to that. If he is able to read coverages, Sark can use that to his advantage. Like Sark's gonna have to read this out and have a good feel as a play caller. And at the end of the day, that's what we hired him for. And I think the next few weeks are as much on Sark's shoulders as they are on Maalik's.
Yeah, I agree with 100% of what you said there. Let's start with what we know about Maalik. And you addressed some of the things, but I want to build on top of what you said. I'm on all the Texas message boards, all the inside sourcing sites that you can be on as a ridiculously obsessed college football and particularly Texas Longhorns fan, not just football fan, but basketball fan, baseball fan. The list goes on and on. I'm fully plugged into University of Texas athletics as much as I can be as a fan. Here's what we know and what's been reported. Number one is that there's no question, and this has been the case since the day Maalik got on campus. There's no question that there is a mountain, and I mean mountain, of support funneling towards Maalik Murphy right now. And there has been, and it's been building ever since he stepped foot on campus before last year, as he is now a redshirt freshman. He's such an incredibly liked young man. He's 19 years old. He's liked by everybody, almost everybody, consensusly in that locker room. If you've heard any of the commentary from players at yesterday's media availability, including the likes of Xavier Worthy, Tavondre Sweat, and Jalen Ford, like some of the veteran leaders on this football team, it's clear that he has extreme levels of support from his teammates and from Sark in this coaching staff. From A.J. Milwee, the quarterback's coach, to Kyle Flood, the co-offensive coordinator and offensive lines coach, to this offensive line, to the support of his fellow quarterbacks, Arch Manning and Quinn Ewers, in that quarterback room. I mean, it's all hands on deck with regards to getting him ready for this opportunity, because another angle to this that we haven't even addressed yet is if Maalik does play, say he plays really well over the next 3 games, Texas wins all these games, and he's a big reason why. He looks like, I don't want to say an elite quarterback, but he looks really, really good, looks like a guy that could start if not for Texas, for another high-profile program in his future. What does that do for his future? I mean, he's a guy who hasn't played a whole lot of football yet. He's still got a couple years of eligibility before he could potentially enter the draft that he can use to play college football. So, as he is a redshirt freshman. But that's the one thing we know is for sure is he's got all the support that he needs. And there have been situations in the past where that hasn't been the case. The starter gets hurt and you have a divide in that locker room. And it would be very easy, I think, for this Texas team in particular. Let me pause because Diamondbacks are now one strike away from punching their ticket to the World Series.
Ooh,
So
wasn't that bad?
they had the Phillies on their heels. Paul Sewald, who they actually acquired, funny enough, from the Seattle Mariners at the trade deadline to be in the back of that bullpen. That ball is driven out to right. He settles under it, and the Diamondbacks are going to the World Series for the first time in 22 years to face the Texas Rangers. They downed the Philadelphia Phillies 2 consecutive games. They out-hit the Phillies 11-5 in Game 7. They win 2 consecutive road games in Philadelphia to beat what many thought to be the best team in the National League, but now it is those Arizona Diamondbacks. The Snakes don't die, and they will go up against another young team, the Texas Rangers, in the World Series. The Philly season ends. Our World Series matchup is set, but we have plenty of time elsewhere to talk about that. Exciting, and congratulations to the Arizona Diamondbacks. But that's the one thing we know. Another thing we know is Maalik is 99% going to start the game on Saturday. But I'd say 100% chance he's going to start the game on Saturday because when given the opportunity to insert a quarterback into that game on Saturday, Sark went with Maalik Murphy. There was no decision really to be made there. Sark said yesterday in his press conference availability that if the game were today, Maalik would be the starter, and I don't think that's going to change here in the next 3 days unless Maalik Murphy gets hurt. So we know Maalik's most likely going to be the starter, but there is this angle of it that we can't go without mentioning, and that is Arch Manning is now a play away from being thrown to the fire in what's supposed to be a full redshirt freshman year for him, a full redshirt year for him. And keep in mind, he can play in 4 games and still keep that red shirt. But Arch Manning is now a snap away from possibly being the starting quarterback for the University of Texas. The last thing I'll say is, and then you can take this where you want to go with it, a lot of people outside of the Texas program that aren't quite as plugged in to the Texas program will tell you, well, what is Sark doing playing Maalik Murphy? Arch is going to leave if, say, Maalik plays out the rest of this year, he does really well, and then he starts next year, Arch is going to transfer. Well, first of all, you don't know what you're talking about. Second of all, you're wrong because well-connected sources to the Texas football program have been told there's absolutely zero backlash from the Manning family, from Peyton, Eli, Cooper, whoever it might be, or Arch himself over the fact that Murphy is getting the call. One source mentioned that the Mannings almost certainly have a strong sense that Arch isn't quite ready to be thrown into the fire this year. I think he just turned 18 recently. And I think they're relieved as a family that he's not being thrown into the fray right away. The Mannings are perfectly fine with a full redshirt season. And one of the reasons Arch committed to Texas, we know about Sark, we know about the opportunity to play at Texas, we know about the NIL opportunities, we know about all that. But one of the reasons he specifically committed to Texas was because they had a quarterback room where if, say, Quinn Ewers were to get hurt this year, he wouldn't have to be the immediate backup. He wouldn't have to be thrown into the fire right away. He knew about the presence of a guy like Maalik Murphy, who's been in the system now for a year and a half and knows the system and at least has experience with the terminology and everything else. So I think Manning, as humble as he is, totally fine with it. If he gets his opportunity, great. That'll be arguably the biggest storyline in college football when it happens. But right now, the focus should be on Maalik Murphy. So that brings us to our next question, which is, if you're the coach of Texas right now, given what you know about Maalik Murphy, given what you've seen from this Texas offense this year, what are your things going into the game on Saturday against BYU? What does Texas need to do offensively? Is there something they need to lean on? What do you think the game plan should look like for Maalik Murphy on Saturday?
Well, I think with any young quarterback, you want to settle him down to the game. I mean, a screen pass here, a short pass there, like identify something on film that Murphy is comfortable with and comfortable throwing and like is confident with, and do that early and often. Like we don't know what exactly that is, but there's something there because the coaches have been watching this dude in practice, as you said, for a year and a half now, and longer than that on scouting tape. So that's the hope that I have, that Sark will be prepared and have a subsequent game plan ready to get Murphy settled down into the game. And then from there, you can kind of flow into what's working and what's not working. You got to obviously lean on the run game. That's going to be a big deal. But the second part is, it's not just the run game has to be good. You got to stay on schedule. You can't get into third and longs and, expect, high conversion rate. And that goes with any quarterback, but especially a young quarterback making their first start in college football.
Yeah, absolutely. What's the general scouting report on Maalik Murphy? You've mentioned a lot of it. Everyone knows he has a cannon of a right arm. I mean, he has a howitzer. We saw a little bit of that flash in that drive against Houston. He kind of sailed Adonai Mitchell on one of those throws, but he threw it. I mean, he throws the ball like, it's kind of like, okay, I'm going to make this throw. It may or may not be caught, or it may or may not be exactly on target to my intended receiver. But I'm going to throw this ball hard enough that it's not going to be caught by the other team. I'm going to make sure it's not caught by the other team. And that's kind of the way I see it. So one of the things I'm worried about, and one of the things that Maalik has struggled with, but this coaching staff has worked with him to refine his mechanics and to process information as he sees it when he's reading defenses. Two things I'm worried about. Number one is, obviously, for a young quarterback, we saw this last year a little bit with Quinn Ewers, slowing the game down and processing information quickly enough in this complex offense that Sark runs is never always easy for everyone making their first couple of starts in college football. So how does he process information, especially if he's under pressure in this game? Secondly, I know he can throw the ball deep. I mean, he's got that Joe Milton level arm strength. Like, he can throw the ball as far as you want him to. He can throw the deep ball. He actually throws a very beautiful deep ball, We saw it in the spring game, and we've seen it before in practice footage and elsewhere. But does he have that change of speed? Can he layer the throw on, say, 3rd and 7 to Jatavion Sanders over the linebacker between the safety? Can he make those kinds of throws that we've seen Quinn become so good at making many, many times? Like, Quinn has developed, and he's just on another level in terms of arm talent and the way he throws the ball. But we haven't seen the touch yet. It's kind of very similar in a way to Joe Milton. We haven't seen that in a live game yet, and it's something that Maalik Murphy has struggled with in his high school career, and it's led to some of the accuracy issues throughout his young career in the high school and college game. So those are my concerns. But I think Sark, if he's touted to be this great offensive mind and, so to speak, a quarterback whisperer, he will build a game plan. You're going to see, I think, a lot of the screen game, as that's already Texas did a lot of before this injury. You're still going to see a lot of that in different ways. Quick screen, flat routes to tight ends, comeback routes to their bigger targets like at A.D. Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Jatavion Sanders. Gunnar Helm has actually been a bigger factor in this offense as of late. I think they will take some deep shots at times once they get him in a rhythm, because that's something they can do, especially against a lesser talented team like BYU. And they're going to, of course, you have to lean on the run game. I would say at least 30 snaps. 20 of those got to be going to Jonathan Brooks, and maybe 10 of them have got to be going to CJ Baxter. CJ Baxter had his best game as a Texas Longhorn, and he looked healthy in that Houston game with coming off, 2 full weeks of rest off the bye week. So lean on the run game, get some quick stuff, get him in a rhythm, take some deep shots. But, I think the next 3 or 4 weeks, however long Maalik Murphy is the quarterback for this Texas team, if and when Quinn does come back, whenever that happens, these next 5 games and the result of these next 5 games, the result of the season, as the season now kind of hangs in the balance in a way. Everything that Texas is playing for is kind of hanging in the balance. Like, you don't have as much room for error now as you may think you do within the Big 12. I'm not even talking about the college football playoff conversation, because if you slip up against, say, Kansas State as just one example, they would have the head-to-head. You would now have 2 conference losses. They would have 1, and you would need them to lose another 2 times without losing a game yourself, because you would lose the head-to-head battle, and you would need them to have 3 conference losses because you have 2. Because if you both end up with 2, they got the head-to-head, they win that tiebreaker. And then you have Oklahoma State, who's all of a sudden playing good football. There are a couple other teams lingering in there. So, and you have, of course, Oklahoma, who we expect to be there, right, as of right now. So there's not as much room to slip up. So you gotta act with a sense of urgency. And there are other pieces of this team that absolutely have to step up. It's not just about the quarterback in the way this offense plays.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It is.
It's easy to look ahead and think of the what ifs, but right now it's just all about, can you survive in advance? That's really
Yep.
all it is right now. And the big thing for me is I don't want Sark to get too antsy if Malik starts missing throws. Like you gotta find a way to manufacture offense no matter what, even if it happens to be trick plays or just gimmicky stuff. You gotta pull out all the stops to end up winning games. Because right now it's do or die.
Yeah, and there are a lot of Texas fans, and rightfully so, nervous about what's to come, a little anxious about what's to come. I think this program was finally settling into the fact that they had a quarterback who was playing consistently really good football, like high-level football. We know Quinn had a couple bad plays in that Oklahoma game, but aside from that, he had been really good this year. Maybe not with the elite of the elite, but on that next tier of college quarterback. Um, I thought he played really good in the Houston game up until time he actually got hurt and was kind of limited with kind of found out he was kind of limited with what he could do in the passing game with that hurt shoulder. I thought that second touchdown throw, the throw to Xavier Worthy on that deep ball down the right sideline, was one of the best throws he's made in his time at Texas. It's just on a rope, right to Xavier Worthy. I thought he played really well. He was ripping apart that Houston defense for the first quarter and a half of that game. That's another thing that I worry about from a Sark standpoint is it seems like in his time at Texas, and we know about some of the red zone issues that they've had, but it seems like once they kind of get away from the script, it seems like they sometimes get to points in games, in the middle of games, where they kind of run into a wall offensively. And it kind of seems like Sark either runs out of ideas of what they need to do at that particular moment of the game, or it just kind of stalls out for whatever reason. Um, that can't happen because it then allows the other team to have more opportunities and to have more possessions, get back into the game. And you're putting a defense on the field which has been leaky the past couple of weeks. You don't. That's another conversation is the Texas defense, but that's another one of the worries I think Texas fans have is this kind of trend that's been developing while Sark has been at Texas. It just kind of seems like once they get away from that opening script, it's some good and other bad, some bad. So I don't know. I think the bottom line is survive in advance. Develop a game plan around Maalik Murphy's strengths, whatever you think those are, and beat BYU this weekend. That's the goal right now. It's one game at a time, survive in advance. I'm not even thinking about the college football playoff right now. I'm thinking about, as a Texas fan, getting to Arlington, however that has to happen, because that was my primary goal for this year was double-digit wins, get to Arlington somehow, some way. And I know some Texas fans out there, especially after the Alabama win, were thinking undefeated, let's get to the playoff. But right now, you just kind of have to take it a game, a step at a time, see what you have in Maalik Murphy. I don't want to get into the Arch conversation until we have to. But that's the goal, absolutely, is one game at a time, survive in advance. Anything else you want to address from a Texas football standpoint? There is a defensive conversation that we could have right now, but I don't want to carry this conversation on too long. Maybe that's something we can address on Thursday or Friday's episode.
Yeah, I think the defense will be all right. I think they know what they have to do. And the hope is that the focus can be there for 4 quarters. That's really been the missing piece these last few games. The first few games, the defense was fantastic. And the hope was you bring a couple of guys back after the bye week and you move forward. But the leaky defense returned against Houston, especially um, in those middle stretches of the game where, Texas was kind of up big there and let it slip away almost.
Here's what I'll say about the defense, then we'll move on to another topic. What do you know about this Texas defense? What's been consistent about this Texas defense the entire year is the run defense. The run defense has been there. Even when they've been leaky in the secondary, the run defense has been there. No question about it. Now, the questions, I think, for this Texas defense is pass rush hasn't been good enough consistently. It's had its moments, but not nearly good enough consistently. I think Barron Sorrell was a guy that I had pretty high hopes for coming into this season. And I talked about it when I did my defensive preview for this team. And he kind of hasn't really, I won't say he's done nothing, but he hasn't lived up to the expectations, I don't think, a lot of people within the program and outside of the program had for him. I thought, some people would have thought he would be a double-digit sack kind of guy this year, or somewhat close to that at least. But
first team All Big 12. That was what we
but
were looking at.
From a production standpoint, it kind of hasn't really been there from a pass rush standpoint. Ethan Burke, the sophomore out of Westlake, he's had his moments and he's actually been more productive than Sorrell has been. But ever since he kind of had a coming out party in that Alabama game, he hasn't been consistent enough. But he's a younger player who's still developing physically. So I can kind of get it from that standpoint. Barron Sorrell's the guy who you just got to be better. And then Anthony Hill has kind of been a staple of this pass rush, but he's a freshman, and that's not his primary. I mean, they use him in some packages as a pass rusher, but he's really meant to be a Jalen Ford, a linebacker, an all-around linebacker. That's what he was recruited as, and that's the position he's going to play alongside Jalen Ford. And then the injuries to the secondary. The pass rush isn't getting enough pressure, and the injuries to the secondary haven't done Texas any good. And Terrence Brooks was a guy that had played well the last couple of games of last year. He was a highly rated guy coming in, when he was recruited. He played well at the start of this year, but has kind of gotten exposed the past couple of games for whatever reason, hasn't played well. As he's kind of been forced into that number one cornerback role. Ryan Watts should be back this week. He didn't return last week. He should be back this week. That has to help them. But, missing Catalan, missing Watts, and having the Maalik Muhammads of the world, the Gavin Holmes of the world struggle in their place with not enough playmakers in this secondary. They're not making enough plays on the football. It's been weird. So we'll see what happens, but we got to move on to another topic. So thank you to the one viewer that we do have right now. Thank you so much for tuning in. 10:45 on a Tuesday night after the Diamondbacks, the number 6 seed in the National League, a team that I did not expect to make the World Series, but they're here, and they will face the Texas Rangers in the World Series, which begins Friday night. So we're excited about that, and we will be diving deep into that series either tomorrow or Thursday before it happens. Put your questions. If you have Texas football, college football, sports questions in general, put them in our chat. I think you're going to have to go to YouTube to do that, though, because it seems like Twitter, you have to be a premium. At least in my experience, you got to be subscribed to the premium version of X or Twitter to be able to comment on those Twitter live streams. So We greatly appreciate any sort of engagement, even if it's just hello. So thank you for that. All right. This has been a conversation I've been wanting to have for a while now. It's last week we did our power rankings. This week I want to rank our top 5 one-loss teams in college football. So do you have a list prepared, or do you want me to start us off?
Go ahead and start us off, actually.
Okay. Let me pull up the lower third, as I did make a lower third for this. Who are the top 5 one-loss teams in college football? And there are more than 5 one-loss teams, to be clear. There's Ole Miss, Oregon State, Utah, Texas, Oregon, Penn State, Alabama. I mean, you've got a litter of teams to choose from, and most of them are ranked within the top 25 right now. For my number 5, I went with Oregon State, the Beavers out of the Pac-12. I think they're currently ranked somewhere within the top 15 in the AP poll. I'm not sure where Josh Pate had them tonight in the JP, the new version of the JP poll, which is a power rating, not a power ranking. And it's absolutely hilarious, guys, to go check out the Twitter reactions to the JP poll. It's one of the best parts of my week, college football-wise. But Oregon State, everyone remembers DJ Uiagalelei from Clemson, highly recruited guy, 5-star guy. He's played really well this season. And Oregon State's a team that knows their identity. They already beat Utah by 2 touchdowns, which is one of the reasons why I was close to including Utah after their close win over USC. But Oregon State beat Utah. They've beaten UCLA by double digits. They're a team that knows their offensive identity. They have a quarterback that's playing really well. They're averaging 163 rushing yards per game. They're one of the best rushing teams in the country. They have a really nice offensive line, a defense that's playing well enough. And they have a pretty favorable schedule these next couple weeks. Arizona's been a team that has given teams trouble, and they're overachieving with what they're doing. They're kind of in that next tier along with Colorado in the Pac-12. But they get Arizona. They have to go on the road to Arizona. Then they get Colorado and I think Stanford. So those are their next 3 games, all very winnable for Oregon State. Then at the end of the season is where we'll really see where this Oregon State team stands within the Pac-12 as they finish up with, I think it's Oregon's their last game, but I think it's Washington. Oregon and Washington, the top dogs in the Pac-12 the last 2 weeks of the season. But right now, I think you give the edge to Oregon State over Utah and Ole Miss, because I think they're more physical up front. And I like the way DJU's playing, and they have an identity offensively that's working against really good teams.
Yeah, they're consistent. That's what we know. I mean, they bring the physicality every single week. And here's what I'm thinking we do, because I actually didn't have a list prepared for this. I'm thinking we just have a conversation about the 5 teams you had prepared.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, DJU's running ability, I think, has been the most interesting thing that they've been tapping into here lately. And also his ability to throw the deep ball. That's been the 2 things that I think have been utilized better than what they did at Clemson. For whatever reason, it was tapped into, but it was never really unleashed like this. And to be fair, he's a better player than he was then, but it just seems like a better fit in this offense. A power running game paired with a physical defense. I think his style of play fits the mindset of that football team.
Absolutely. Number 4, I had Penn State. Look, they got a ferocious defense. We know that for sure. Athletic, physical front 7. They're very fundamentally sound defensively. I thought they played a good game defensively for the most part on a big stage at Ohio State this past weekend. Um, but I do think, unfortunately, they're a year away offensively from really hitting that college football playoff potential, from reaching their team ceiling is all I'll say. Because they could still make the playoff this year. I'm not ruling that out by any stretch of the imagination. But the padlock stat from this weekend was facing a really good defense, 1 of 16 on third down. I think they were 0 of 3 or 0 of 4, maybe 1 of 4 on fourth down. And Drew Aller's still a very young quarterback who's still going through the early stages of development. They still have to play Michigan here in a couple weeks. I think they have limitations athletically at the receiver position. One of the guys who they did get in the transfer portal from this offseason hasn't really panned out the way they wanted him to. I really like Keandre Lambert-Smith, their top guy at the receiver position. I think he's an NFL guy, but they really struggle to create any sort of separation in that Ohio State game. Things are just, I think, slow to develop in the passing game, especially downfield, as they haven't been able to generate any sort of explosive plays down the field. We know, I'm not doubting the fact that they can do it, but they haven't proven to do it yet. And if they're not a team that's done it through, what is it now, 7, 8 games? I mean, we're pretty much 2/3 the way through the season.
Yeah, they are who they are.
They're as a football team, little things can change, but I think you're pretty much you are who you are offensively. It seems like we know they have 2 great backs who they can lean on, and that's kind of been effective. They can move the football, but it just feels like they have some limitations offensively with what they can do. They need to win a certain kind of way, especially against the more elite defenses that they're going to see, including Michigan. They're a top 5 one-loss team, and they're a top 15 team in college football, no question about it. But right now, they're at number 4 for me in my one-loss rankings.
Yeah, I think all your points are correct, but what I will say is it's not, if you're a Drew Aller fan, if you're a Penn State fan, I wouldn't panic on Drew Aller. This is still really early on in his development. And come next year, you add a couple weapons. You most likely lose Singleton to the draft, I think, but maybe you'll get another guy, as you always seem to do in recruiting. At a big school like Penn State, there's going to be someone in the pipeline. I'm not, this doesn't seem like it's quite there yet offensively, but as long as, the defense continues to play like this, come next year, a full year under Drew Aller's belt, then that's the year where you're going to look to win and get over the hump.
Absolutely. There are already people saying that don't be surprised if Penn State's a top 5 preseason team next year, because they're going to be really, really good with some of the returning players that they have. I assume they dip into the portal, as they've been a program that's proven to use the portal, maybe not to a extreme extent, but they do use it to plug holes in their team. I do think there's a conversation that some of the national pundits have been having. There was an article today or yesterday in The Athletic about how we actually evaluate this Penn State program and the expectations that should be there on a year-to-year basis. And now, it's not going to get any easier, considering realignment happens next year and you have Oregon, Washington, UCLA, and USC coming to your conference. But what is good for Penn State is maybe that means you don't, with divisions going away, Maybe that means you're not stuck with this triad of elite teams that you just can't, for whatever reason, get over the hump with Ohio State and or Michigan. And you can find your way to the Big Ten championship game in other ways. And no, it's not even close to panic time with Drew Aller. That Ohio State's defense is going to make many other quarterbacks look very subpar with what they do defensively and the talent that they have. I think that Ohio State's program is just a step ahead. And hey, look, even with the way they played, I think if that game's in Happy Valley, it could have turned out very differently. It
Definitely.
wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't, and that's that. But if it was, we could have seen a very different game. All right, number 3, I have Alabama. And I actually thought about ranking them too. But considering the logic I used for this ranking, ranking Oregon State ahead of Utah because Oregon State did beat Utah earlier this year, I wanted to stay fairly consistent by keeping Texas ahead of Alabama. But this Alabama team, they got down early to Tennessee, I think it was something like 20-7 on Saturday, and they responded like Alabama does. Tommy Rees has done an excellent job of week to week getting better and better at designing a game plan around what Jalen Milroe does well. I think they're becoming more confident offensively each week. They have a capable running game with McClellan and a deep running back room. The offensive line is playing better week to week. I like Jermaine Burton, some of the weapons they have, and the defense is absolutely nasty. So Alabama for sure is right now slightly below Texas in my rankings. If I didn't really take into consideration the fact that now Texas is missing their quarterback. So I still kept Texas ahead of Bama because, to be frank, Texas beat them, and that just can't be ignored. But this Alabama team right now is a different version of itself than it was in week 2. And I think if they matched up right now with both sides healthy, it'd be a very evenly matched game, depending on where it would be played, would maybe decide the game at this point. I think they're fairly similar teams in terms of talent up front. So they have a bye. I think they have a bye this week, and then they have that big game with LSU next week, which will be huge.
Yeah. The LSU game is one that's interesting, just because I don't think Alabama has played an offense as good as LSU, and that's with all due respect to Texas and what they've been doing and what Quinn Ewers has been doing. But LSU's offense is probably a top 3 offense in the country, and I mean they've been hanging 40 on just about everybody. That defense is questionable, but that's where I kind of pause. Like, is Alabama capable of dropping 40 on the team? I mean, they've been kind of winning these, 27, 24, 30-24 ball games. And I mean, do they have that extra gear? That's really the next question.
We'll talk about that game next week when it comes. But for right now, I think Alabama is fairly properly slotted at the number 3 position. Number 2, I have Texas. Number 1, I have Oregon. Let's just go ahead and cut to the chase. I think Oregon's the most well-rounded team right now of the one-loss teams. They lost that game to Washington, but they know who they are. I think they're much better up front from a physicality standpoint and an NFL talent standpoint than a lot of people give them credit for. especially the casuals in college football. If you watch that Washington game, they were clearly the more physical team up front in that second half.
Yeah.
Love Bucky Irving at running back. I think he put up 180 rushing yards last week in dispatching Washington State on the road. Bo Nix is a guy that at least has to be mentioned into the Heisman conversation, or when we have conversations about the quarterbacks who have been the best in college football this year, his name's got to be at least within the top 6 or 7, in my opinion. Played really well in that Washington game. He was not the reason that they lost that game. He's come a long way from where he was at Auburn. Love Troy Franklin at the receiver position. I just think Oregon is just a more well-rounded football team right now. They don't have as many – you can't poke as many holes in what you've seen, even with that loss to Washington on the road, albeit in a close fashion where a play or two changed the outcome of that game, including that field goal attempt, than you can with Texas, Alabama, Penn State, and Oregon State. That's really what it came down to for me.
Yeah, I mean, Oregon has shown they have that extra gear. They can drop 50. Texas hasn't shown that. Texas has had stretches of dominant offense and stretches of dominant defense, but to me, they're yet to offensively, they're yet to go forth 4 straight quarters of dominant football. And that's been something we've mentioned on the show. And to Oregon's credit, I think the fact that Bo Nix has 54 games of college football experience under his belt, I think that's the most ever by an FBS QB, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, that's so valuable. I mean, you can't put a price on that. We know Dan Lanning is going to be aggressive. We know that he has his philosophies about going forward on 4th down, and sometimes it's going to land in their favor, sometimes it's not. But I mean, at the end of the day, out of these teams, I'm putting my chips in on Oregon.
Yeah, I think that Baylor game was a pretty complete game from a Texas standpoint. Yes, they haven't shown they can score 50, but I don't think that's a talent issue. I think that's more of a Sark issue. Yeah. I would argue Texas has more talent offensively than almost any of these teams. It's just for other reasons, they haven't shown they can do that, and that's fair. Bo Nix has been better than Quinn Ewers this year, game to game, and I think we could have an argument about this all day long. But I think, even as a Texas fan, what it came down to for me was I think that Oregon loss on the road to Washington was a little bit better of a loss in the way that they played and the team that they lost to than the neutral site loss to an Oklahoma team that's really, really, really good, but a team that Texas should have beaten. I mean, Texas is much more talented than Oklahoma. They played a C game and Oklahoma played a B+ game, and that's what happens in college football. So that's that. I mean, I think that's probably as good as of a ranking as I could make. You can make your little tweaks, comment who you would have in your top 5. We'll see where it goes from here. We will see where it goes from here. All these teams, though, they have one thing in common, and that is the margin of error right now is small when we're talking about the college football playoff for all of them. So that's that. Okay. 54 minutes. We have a viewer. It's 11:06. So we still are in pretty good shape, depending on what it comes down to is how long this Heisman conversation takes. I'm thinking probably we spend 5 to 10 minutes just talking about some of the candidates, and then we get into this Duke conversation. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. We really haven't talked about the Heisman Trophy race yet in depth on this show, aside from maybe mentioning it here and now in passing in past episodes. But I want to just go over some of who are where does this race stand right now in your mind? What are the names that come to mind at the top of your list when it comes to the Heisman Trophy race at this point going into week 9?
Well, right now you got to mention JJ McCarthy, definitely. He hasn't had the big Heisman moment yet, but we know there are games on the schedule here coming up where he could get those. The other quarterback to mention, of course, is Michael Penix Jr., who's been outside of this past game against Arizona, pretty much flawless as a quarterback. I mean, the back shoulder touch that he has, just no matter what part of the field it is, does not even the red zone, like inside the 20, it doesn't matter. He's putting that throw on the money every single time, and he has that trust in his receivers to go get it, and he's putting that ball to where it's 70-30 just about every time. To me, that's his like superpower as a quarterback. That back shoulder fade, that 50-50 ball that he puts just about on the money every time. Some of the other names, I think it kind of, to me, there's a gap from those two guys to the next guy. I don't know if the guys after those two have been quite as consistent. And that's kind of where I draw a line in the sand as to winning contenders. But there's obviously 4 guys that end up going in New York. Is it 4 or 3? I think it's 3. Never mind.
I agree with you. I think McCarthy and Penix are up there. McCarthy doesn't have the signature win. Michigan doesn't have the signature win yet.
Yeah.
But when you look at McCarthy's numbers, he's averaging more yards per attempt than any of these guys that we're going to talk about. And he's on pace to break the all-time single-season completion percentage mark for a quarterback in college for a single season. He's completing 78% of his passes, 18 touchdowns, 3 picks. 56 of his pass attempts this year have resulted in either a first down or a touchdown. Both those marks lead the country. He's been fantastic. We'll see what happens when he plays Penn State. We'll see what happens when he plays Ohio State. But right now, he's right at the top of that conversation. Same thing with Michael Penix Jr. He has the signature win over Oregon, which, in my opinion, should give him the award right now if it were handed out today, slightly over J.J. McCarthy. He's thrown for more yards than any of these guys have, 2,576. He's got the second most yards per attempt. He's completing 71% of his passes himself, 20 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. So he's been great. The one quarterback I would add into that tier right now, because I think he absolutely deserves it, is Dillon Gabriel at Oklahoma, because he does have the win over Texas with that game-winning drive. And you look at his numbers, they're absolutely good enough to be there. He's got a higher completion percentage than Michael Penix Jr. He's got 19 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and he's right there in quarterback rating with Michael Penix Jr. and J.J. McCarthy. So I would add in, he also has 5 rushing touchdowns. So I would add in Dillon Gabriel with what he's done at Oklahoma. I think he absolutely deserves it. Right outside of the conversation, though, I do have a couple guys. Right now, those would be my 3 finalists, but I have a couple guys I wanted to mention, and you can give your thoughts on these. Jordan Travis, I think, deserves to be mentioned. We know Florida State hasn't looked, dominant in all their games, but that doesn't take away from the fact that Jordan Travis is having another excellent season. And he's probably the reason Florida State's in this position. Um, he's not quite completing his passes at the rate of Penix Jr., Gabriel, or McCarthy, but 66%, plenty good enough. 15 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. So he's thrown the least amount of interceptions of any of these quarterbacks. He's got 5 rushing touchdowns himself and almost 2,000 passing yards. So I would have him at least in the conversation, along with Bo Nix, who we already mentioned. And even though I don't think Jaden Daniels is going to win the award, it's just hard to win the award as a 2-loss team unless he wins the SEC and somehow gets into the college football playoff, which they're going to need to do if they want to be there or have any chance to. What he's done, the numbers he's putting up are absolutely ridiculous. He, in my opinion, if we're just ranking the level of quarterback play itself in college football this year, he's absolutely top 5 in my opinion. So I'd have Jaden Daniels, and then you have to throw Marvin Harrison Jr. into this conversation because he's been, in my opinion, the best non-quarterback in college football so far this year. 42 catches, 766 yards, 18 yards per catch, and 6 touchdowns. And we still have, 5 games left? He's averaging 143 receiving yards per game and a touchdown per game. And in Ohio State's biggest games this year, he's come up huge. The game against Notre Dame and this past weekend against Penn State. So I absolutely think you throw him into the conversation. But my final 3 as of right now, given all of that, would be Penix Jr., J.J. McCarthy, and Dylan Gabriel.
Yeah, those would be my 3 as well.
Okay. Well, that does it for that conversation. Pretty nice and concise, right? Okay, let's get to our college basketball for today before we wrap this thing up. I want to talk about Duke today because over the weekend, Duke extended Jon Scheyer. They gave him a 6-year extension that will go through 2028, 2029. So basically to the end of this decade. For the most part, 2022 recap for Duke. It was Jon Scheyer's first year replacing Mike Krzyzewski after that Final Four run last year, or the year before. First year on campus last year, they dealt with some injuries to some of their younger players in the early stages of last year, including Dariq Whitehead, and one other that left for the draft. But they still finished with a 27-9 record, 14-6 in conference play. They did have the round of 32 exit, which doesn't typically live up to Duke basketball standards. You at least want to get to that second weekend of the tournament. And Duke fans would tell you need to get to the Final Four every year. But they had a younger team last year with Philip Kowski and Tyrese Proctor and a lot of these freshmen that were just coming into their own, getting experience. We know experience matters in college basketball. And the team they had this year coming back absolutely is top 5 in college basketball, in my opinion. And they're going to have those. They're now in year 2 under Jon Scheyer, they're going to have those high expectations of getting to the Final Four. So any thoughts on Duke?
The main thoughts is I think they have a pretty underrated recruiting class coming in as well. I believe it's TJ Power is a guy that I saw highlights of here recently preparing for this. Really athletic guy. I mean, you're throwing in a guy who's 6'7", long wingspan. I mean, pretty much a NBA draft guy that NBA scouts pretty much drool over if he can shoot any type of percentage from three. So I think, as a 20-year-old, as an older guy coming in, he's probably going to be able to contribute more than most freshmen would. And then let's see. That's really the main guy I wanted to mention. You already mentioned Philip Kowski. He shoots well from three consistently. I think if there's one knock on Duke I would point to, it would probably be rim protection, but I don't think that's a huge issue because that's probably something Philip Kowski worked on in the offseason, if I were to guess. And this is a team that likes to get up and down the floor and play fast anyways.
Yeah, really what this comes down to is, first of all, they've got returning talent that now has experience. Jeremy Roach, their point guard, can't go. I mean, we can't go without mentioning him in this conversation. Last year, averaged 13.5 points per game as their true point guard, 52% true shooting percentage. He's just a very solid, experienced point guard that will drive this offense. You have those two sophomores coming back, those two highly recruited guys from last year, and Philip Kowski and Tyrese Proctor coming back to pair with Jeremy Roach in that backcourt. Proctor was a guy who averaged almost 10 points per game as a freshman. We know about Philip Kowski. He's going to be he's supposedly going to be in the Naismith, Player of the Year conversations if he lives up to his expectations coming into this year. He's one of the more versatile and more skilled big men in a world of elite big men in college basketball, as he averaged 15 points per game. But bringing those two guys back to pair with Jeremy Roach is huge. You have this recruiting class, which was the number 2 or number 3 recruiting class in America. Jared McCain is another guy I'd mentioned, along with TJ Power. Those were the 2 5-stars that they're bringing on campus. Jared McCain, very talented combo guard that they're bringing on. Power, being the power forward. You also bring in Caleb Foster and Sean Stort as depth. Those are 2 freshmen that were highly recruited, but as 4-stars coming out of high school. I think this Duke team, along with bringing back Mark Mitchell and Ryan Young in that front court, Mark Mitchell will do a lot of the dirty work inside, including help with rim protection. And then Ryan Young, who's a versatile guy and can shoot the 3. I think this Duke team, as opposed to some of the other talented Duke teams in the past where it's been a lot of talent but not a lot of substance, I think they have the perfect mix of experience, talent, highly recruited freshmen, and returning production coming back that'll make for a great blend of a roster in year 2 under John Shire. In terms of the expectation for Duke, they're going to have one of the top point guards in the country and one of the top big men in the country. That's always good, having that nice 1-2 punch. They're both going to have another year of experience under their belt with Proctor and Philip Kowski going into their sophomore years with a full off season to develop. He's got one of the best freshman classes coming in, as Duke almost always does. And he's not going to have to solely rely on those freshmen, especially come later on in the year, because they have the experience that I mentioned with Mitchell, Roach, Proctor, Philip Kowski, Ryan Young, those guys. You'll gain more familiarity with this Duke team once you start to watch them. It's sometimes hard for non-college basketball geeks like me to put names to faces at this point, 2 weeks before the season, as it's been since March since you watched a college basketball game, probably, if I had to guess. I'm guessing during the summer you're not going back and watching film on college basketball unless you're one of those guys that does scouting for the NBA draft. But bottom line is the expectations are high at Duke once again. this year, I think it would be a disappointment if they don't at least reach the second weekend of the tournament, if not the Final Four. I just love the mix of experience, raw talent, 5-star freshman, second year coach, NBA level guys, and Filipkowski and Proctor, who maybe project to be lottery picks next year. Who knows? And an experienced point guard, which is always huge in college basketball, with Jeremy Roach. So
I've heard that name, Jeremy Roach, before. Is he a transfer, or has he been at Duke?
he's been at Duke a couple years.
Okay.
Texas had a guy named Roach. That was Kerwin Roach, who I don't know.
That may be why I'm getting confused.
I don't. It's why I got confused in the first place when I watched Jeremy Roach last year at Duke. But I don't know if they're related at all. I haven't actually looked that up. But years back, Texas had a guy named Kerwin Roach. This is Jeremy Roach, who's been in college basketball for a while, but he was really good last year. Really, all you can say is I think Duke, they're going to be top 5 preseason. I think they already are, actually, as the AP poll is already out. I think Filipkowski is a guy who could be in the conversation for Naismith Player of the Year. I think the X factor for them is Tyrese Proctor. One of the knocks on Tyrese Proctor is his ability to shoot from the perimeter. So hopefully he worked on that in the offseason and can shoot a little bit better from the perimeter more consistently. But other than that, man, it's all about John Shire and his ability to find the right rotations, make sure this team is locked in defensively, or as locked in as they can be, and get this team to mesh come January and February going into March when you absolutely need it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Parting shots. You got any? Can be anything we talked about today or anything else in sports.
Well, NBA basketball is back.
Yes.
I'm a bit of a sicko when it comes to NBA basketball. Not as much of a sicko when it comes to college basketball, but this Warriors Suns game, if you're interested in NBA ball at all, go ahead and turn that on, because this is really going to come down to the wire here.
Yeah, absolutely. Great game earlier, by the way, with to kick it all off with Nuggets and Lakers. Tomorrow we're going to get a couple good games. The opening week of NBA is always, for me, been peak interest. Then it kind of dips off a little bit in November for whatever reason. But this year it's a little bit different because we're going to have the in-season, mid-season, whatever you want to call it, tournament that they're installing for the first time this year. And then after that, we'll get to the Christmas games, which is always one of the best days of the NBA season. Then soon after that, we're, approaching the All-Star break, and it kind of speeds up after that, really.
Yeah.
Because after the All-Star break, it's the playoff push for the most part, those last 20-ish games of the season, fighting for playoff seeding. So while the NBA season is long, it will eventually start to speed up. Emmy and I need to go because we need to talk about the way we're going to cover that this year and a couple other things. So thank you guys for listening. Thank you to those of you who tuned in throughout. This was a really fun episode. We talked about the Texas quarterback situation. We had a good Texas football discussion. We talked about the best one-loss teams in college football in our opinion. We talked about the Heisman conversation, and we got to everything we wanted to today in an hour 15 minutes. So thank you guys for listening. I will be back, maybe not with Emmy. We will see on Thursday or Friday. Hopefully. I haven't actually decided what we're going to talk about on that episode, but we will see. And we'll see you guys soon. Thank you guys for listening to episode 26 at Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. Hook 'em horns, and we'll see you next time. Peace out.
Peace.